I never imagined my life would take such a drastic turn, but looking back, everything seems so interconnected now. My name is Adil Rashid, and for most of my life, I served as an imam in a small but devout community in Birmingham, England. I was 62 years old when everything I knew about faith, existence, and truth began to unravel. It all started on a cold evening in November. The frost had already begun to settle on the windows, and the air carried a biting chill. I remember it so vividly because that evening I felt an ache in my chest, a discomfort that I brushed off as indigestion or fatigue. My wife, Amira, had been urging me for weeks to see a doctor. She always worried too much, I thought. But this time, her concerns weren't unfounded. That dull ache soon turned into sharp pain, and before I knew it, I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by worried faces and the faint beeping of monitors. The doctors diagnosed me with a severe heart condition. "It's critical," one of them said. "We need to perform surgery immediately." I nodded, though my mind was elsewhere. In moments like these, you'd expect a flood of thoughts, maybe memories of loved ones or regrets. But all I felt was numbness. As an imam, I had spent decades comforting others, reciting verses, and preaching about the afterlife. Yet, in that moment, the certainty I had always spoken of felt elusive. The surgery began, and I slipped into unconsciousness. That's when it happened. It's hard to explain what I experienced, because words seem inadequate. One moment, I was surrounded by the sterile brightness of the operating room, and the next, I was in a vast, endless void. It wasn't black or white. It was a kind of nothingness that defies description. I felt weightless, yet aware. At first, there was silence. Then a distant hum, like a melody just out of reach. As it grew louder, I realized it wasn't music, but voices, familiar voices. My father's laughter, my mother's soft lullabies, the prayers of my childhood. They all blended together in a haunting symphony. And then, out of nowhere, I felt a pull, as if some invisible force was guiding me. I found myself standing in a landscape that seemed both beautiful and terrifying. The sky was a mixture of colors I had never seen before, and the ground beneath me felt alive, pulsating with energy. In the distance, I saw a bridge. It was narrow and fragile, suspended over what looked like an abyss. On the other side, there was light, warm, inviting light that seemed to call to me. As I took a step forward, a voice boomed from behind me. "Adil, stop." I turned and saw a figure cloaked in shadow. Its form was indistinct, yet its presence was overwhelming. "You are not ready to cross," it said, its voice reverberating through my very being. "There is more you must see." Suddenly, the world around me shifted. I was no longer on the bridge, but in a place that felt eerily familiar. It was a room filled with books, prayer mats, and the faint scent of incense. My childhood home. I saw myself as a boy, sitting cross-legged on the floor, reciting verses from the Quran under my father's watchful gaze. He corrected my pronunciation with patience, his love evident in every word. But then the scene changed. I was older now, leading prayers at the mosque. The congregation looked up to me with respect and reverence. Yet, as I watched this version of myself, I felt an odd detachment. The figure in front of me seemed more like an actor playing a role than the man I believed myself to be. The voice returned, this time softer, almost kind. "Adil, why did you serve?" The question caught me off guard. "For Allah," I replied instinctively. "Are you sure?" it asked. And with those words, a flood of memories overwhelmed me. Moments of pride, of wanting recognition, of basking in the admiration of others. The voice didn't accuse or condemn. It simply revealed. And with each revelation, I felt a weight settle on my chest. Then came the hardest part. I was back on the bridge, but this time, the abyss below wasn't empty. It was filled with faces. Some were familiar, members of my congregation, people I had counseled, and others were strangers. They cried out to me, their voices filled with pain and anger. "Why didn't you guide us?" one of them shouted. "You spoke of truth, but did you truly believe it?" I wanted to answer, to defend myself, but no words came. Instead, the voice spoke again. "Adil, faith is not just words or rituals. It is a journey, an ever-deepening search for truth. Have you walked that path, or have you merely stood at its edge?" Tears streamed down my face as I realized the truth. I had spent so much of my life teaching others about faith that I had neglected my own. My belief had become routine, a set of practices devoid of personal connection. I had preached about Allah's mercy and love, but had I truly sought to understand it? The light on the other side of the bridge dimmed, and the landscape began to fade. I felt myself being pulled back, the voices and visions growing distant. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital bed. The beeping of monitors filled the room, and my wife's tear-streaked face was the first thing I saw. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. But I wasn't the same. Something inside me had shifted. For days, I couldn't speak about what I had experienced. How could I? It felt too immense, too surreal. Yet the questions lingered. Who was I serving? What did I truly believe? Was I ready to face the answers? Slowly, I began to search. I read not just the Quran, but texts from other faiths, seeking common threads and deeper understanding. I spoke to people of different beliefs, not to debate, but to learn. And in those conversations, I discovered something profound. Faith is not about certainty. It's about the willingness to ask questions, to embrace doubt, and to seek truth with an open heart. The journey wasn't easy. Many in my community viewed my questions as a betrayal. Some distanced themselves, while others openly criticized me. There were moments when the isolation felt unbearable, as though I had willingly stepped into a storm without shelter. My wife, Amira, was my rock through it all. Though she didn't always understand the path I was walking, she stood by me, offering her quiet support. Her patience and unwavering love became a beacon in the darkest of times. I found solace in unexpected places. One afternoon, I visited a small library tucked away in a corner of the city. It was here that I stumbled upon a book of poetry that spoke to my soul. The words were simple yet profound, describing a journey of doubt, loss, and rediscovery. It reminded me that I was not alone, that countless others had walked similar paths before me, seeking meaning and connection in a vast and often confusing world. Over time, I began to connect with others who had experienced similar crises of faith. Some were from my own tradition, while others came from entirely different backgrounds. We would gather in small groups, sharing our stories and listening without judgment. These gatherings became a source of healing and growth for me. They taught me the value of community, not one bound by dogma or shared beliefs, but by mutual respect and a shared longing for truth. One night, as I sat alone in prayer, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known before. It wasn't the peace of having all the answers, but the peace of knowing I was on the right path. I thought of the bridge, the light, and the voice, and for the first time, I felt gratitude for that terrifying yet transformative experience. It was as if the universe had given me a second chance, a nudge to step beyond the confines of what I had always known and to seek something deeper. Life after that has been a journey, one of humility, learning, and unlearning. I'm no longer an imam in the traditional sense, but I still serve, not by preaching or leading prayers, but by sharing my story and listening to others. And in those shared moments, I find glimpses of the divine. Every conversation, every shared tear or laugh, feels like a small piece of the puzzle falling into place. The road ahead is uncertain, but I've learned to embrace it. Because faith, I now realize, isn't about where the path ends. It's about walking it with sincerity, courage, and an open heart. Each day brings new challenges and questions, but also new opportunities to grow. I've come to see doubt not as a weakness, but as a sign of an active, searching spirit. It's in the questioning that we find depth, and in the seeking that we encounter the divine. I've started to document my journey, not for others, but for myself. Writing helps me make sense of the complex emotions and revelations that continue to shape my understanding of faith and life. Occasionally, I share these writings with those who reach out to me, often people who feel lost or uncertain themselves. The connections I've made through these exchanges have been some of the most meaningful of my life. There was a time when I believed that my purpose was to lead others, to provide answers and guidance. Now, I understand that my role is not to lead, but to walk alongside, to listen, to share, and to remind others that they are not alone. In doing so, I find that I am also being guided by the voices of others, by the lessons of my own journey, and by a presence that feels ever closer, ever more real. And so I continue. The road stretches out before me, winding and unpredictable, but filled with promise. I carry with me the memories of that bridge, the light, and the voice, not as burdens, but as gifts. They remind me that the journey is the destination, and that every step, no matter how uncertain, brings me closer to the truth I seek.